I was sent a script. Stephen Woolley, my producer that I worked with years ago, sent me the script, and he developed it from Maura Buffini's play, and the script was absolutely intriguing, you know, but it wasn't quite a vampire story. It wasn't quite a horror movie, and but there were so many elements from different movies I'd made myself. It was set in an abandoned seaside town. It was about a mother and daughter. It was about a young girl trying to tell her story, and the story was seen by viewed through the eyes of different people. And there was something absolutely intriguing there, but it was. It could have been a different movie than the movie we made if somebody else had directed it, perhaps, you know. But I just felt there was something there that was begging to come out, which was a horror film or vampire film, really, you know. And you know, I said to Maura, look, don't be afraid of the traditional elements of the genre, you know. And she went away for a bit, and she came back, and she came up with a beautiful idea that everybody who reads Eleanor's story has to be killed, because the minute the truth is out, the mother and daughter are in mortal danger because of the brotherhood that are pursuing them and stuff like that, you know. So, and you know, we introduced more blood and decapitations and fountains of waterfalls of blood and all sorts of stuff, and it became what it is now. There are so many vampire movies that have been made. People are just tired, you know, and it's impossible to still that yawn that people would have about it. You know what I mean? It's like, but there was interesting enough material there that made it worth taking the chance to do it, really. And there was also the opportunity to kind of redesign the vampire in a way, and to redesign the rules, you know, to rewrite the catechism, if it is a catechism, you know. You know, they can see themselves in mirrors, they can walk around the daylight, they don't have to have teeth, they can have a thumb that comes out, which is a much more useful device if you were a vampire, isn't it, really? And, you know, the only thing common they have with traditional vampires is that they must survive in human blood, and that they live beyond the normal span, really, you know. Gemma had read it. She liked it when I read it, and I met her. We talked about it. We talked about what it could be, and we agreed very rapidly that we wanted to work together. She's extraordinary talent, Gemma. I think, you know, she's more like a kind of Greek or Italian kind of presence than an English presence, isn't she, you know? And Saoirse I'd loved Saoirse's work for years, and she read it too, and she loved it, and she wants to get involved, you know? So it was fascinating. You had these two actors playing mother and daughter who had this totally contrasting kind of, you know, energy, physical energy and emotional energy, you know. And one was all quietude and all watchfulness, the other was all dynamism and sexuality, you know. It was cool, it was good. Well, I tell you what happened was that I cast Gemma, I'd cast Caleb Laundrie Jones, and I'd cast Saoirse, and I think I'd cast Sam and Johnny, and the money kept falling through, you know. So everyone would clear that. I was doing the boards at the time. I had to say, okay, I'm not going to supervise I had to get someone else to do that, and to commit to Byzantium. But the finance kept falling through. So eventually, I just said, look, let's just meet for, you know, 3 days in Soho, and let's rehearse this thing. Let's read through it and see if there's anything there. Even if we never get to do the movie, you know, at least we'd have some memory of it. You know, so we met and began to rehearse, and I began to shoot them with a little video camera, and it began to take on some life, you know, and then lo and behold, the money happened, so we were ready to go.
I was working on another film in Berlin, and Neil and Stephen Woolley came out to visit me, and I think that because I'd worked with Moira Buffini before on Tamara Drew, and she started writing Byzantium, the film, while we were shooting that, and I think she'd suggested to Neil that I should play Clara. So they came over, and I read the script and went, oh my God, I have to do it. It's so right. It's so me. and then we went from there. I expressed how much I wanted to do it, and they said, well, we want you to do it. And it worked that way. And that was really at the beginning of the whole development process, really. And then Saoirse came on board, and the film changed, the screenplay changed a lot. But yeah, it was very flattering to be, you know, approached at the beginning. It's nice because then you can develop together, and you become very passionate about the project because you work you know, very intimately on it. She doesn't trust men at all. And I think she's conditioned to not need them. And so she's very reluctant. She doesn't need anyone. She's very self-sufficient. The only person she needs is her daughter. When the daughter goes, I think that's when she maybe can start thinking about it. I think again it's just she is like an animal. She's like a predator. She doesn't think about the present. She just thinks about the future. We're going here, we're going here, we're going here, we're going here, and to settle down is just not an option for her. She's very multifaceted. She's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. She's ferocious and loving and maternal and deadly and strong, and at the same time totally vulnerable. So it was all these contradictions that I liked, and it felt like a very personal project for me. This mother-daughter relationship thing was something I really could relate to. So that's really what it was that drew me in, that relationship. You have to do a lot of research, and actually that was one of the things I sat down and spoke about with Neil and Moira, is the world, the journey that she has been on, what she'd been doing throughout the ages. And it was quite fun that, what did she do in the 40s? What did she do during the war? What did she do in Victorian times? And so I came up with all these different life stories that she'd lived with her daughter, which we could then bring in very subtly into little things that they carried around with them, or there were songs that I sang which were from certain eras. But then at the same time, my particular character is totally doesn't live in the past at all, and is very, very forward thinking. So as much as I had to do all this research, I had to forget it as well. So she's very contemporary in that sense. But yeah, it was fun because I love that aspect of the pre-production, all the research. It's great. I think we were both really busy shooting, and then we had this sort of couple of days in London where we met up with Neil and sort of just rehearsed a couple of scenes and spoke a lot. And then we went away, and then we didn't see each other again till maybe 2 days before the shoot. But luckily, Saoirse and I had just this natural chemistry with one another. She's so open and grown up, but at the same time like a really giggly teenager. Oh, that time she was only 16. And we just had this natural chemistry, and we didn't have to try too hard. And I think because I have a younger sister and a mother that's not too much older than me, sort of, I naturally felt quite, I naturally started to mother her, but it was more like a sister-sister relationship, to be honest, most of the time. And she's such a wonderful actress. She makes it very, very easy, really exquisite.
I became involved in the film when Neil brought the script to me. We had been trying to work together for a few years before that, and it just hadn't really worked out, time-wise and all that stuff. And he sent me the script, and I was a bit worried at first because I thought, before I had read the script, I thought, it's another vampire film. It was right in the midst of all the Twilight madness and everything. And I wasn't sure if being part of that kind of trend was a good thing, but then I read it and I saw that really I don't really think of it as a vampire film at all. It is a big part of it, and it certainly does affect the relationship between these two characters, but I think it's more about that. So what drew me to Eleanor was the fact that she's 200 years old and she's still 16, and she's very weighted. She's got a very kind of heavy burden, just from the past, just from not really knowing what happened to her, and she's a storyteller as well, and we see at the start of the film that she's writing down her story and trying to tell the truth as fully as she can, but there's something that's being kept from her, and I think that kind of gives her this state of sort of melancholy the whole way through the film. Because it wasn't her choice to become a vampire in the first place. I mean, her mother saved her. She was dying when she was turned into a suppliant. But it wasn't necessarily her choice, and she was very young and very naive at the time and didn't really know what was going on, but trusted her mother. And now, 200 years later, they're the same. They're in limbo. They're, floating from one era to the next, and they can't have a relationship or anything like that. So I think she's always trying to, as I say, justify her killing, and she only wants to kill people who are ready and willing to die. So she'll mainly kill old people. She goes into hospitals to kill them. And at the time, like when we shot it, I thought it was a bit weird, just when I was doing it, I found it a bit odd. But then I saw it on screen and it worked so beautifully, and it was very unnerving. He is kind of life and death in a way. He's dying, but he still holds on to whatever life he has left. I mean, he's very sick, and I think for her, the reason why she's so attracted to him is because she has the opportunity to give him eternal life, and that's something for her that I think could help her live with what she has to do a little bit more. 'Cause she's always trying to justify it. She's always trying to justify killing people. I think when they arrive in the seaside town, it's a real reminder of the past for both of them. And for Eleanor, that's something that makes her more enthusiastic and more curious about really finding out what happened and the whole story of their beginning as a vampire. Whereas Clara is a bit frustrated by it. I think she's quite unnerved, and that comes out through frustration and anger. And she was a prostitute, so she starts to get back into prostitution again, and that's something that Eleanor really has a problem with, because Eleanor is quite classy. Eleanor is very much an old soul and holds on to as much dignity as she can.
So I've kind of always had a fascination for horror and for the genre. But weirdly, since I've started producing for the last 10 years, I've not really produced a horror film. And I felt this terrible kind of lack of something. And so I've been searching for a good horror story, a good supernatural story, a ghost story. I saw a play that my daughter was supposed to be in, which was called A Vampire Story. I live between Bath and Bristol, and my eldest daughter Edith has been part of the theatre group there, the Bristol Young Vic, the Bristol Youth Theatre at the Bristol Old Vic. And she was due to be the lead in a play called Vampire Story, which we couldn't let her do because she was doing her exams. And she was also in the school play, so she chose the school play and didn't do this, but dragged me along to see it because all of her friends were in it. And I really was impressed by the play. It was written for teenagers, for older teenagers. But what I really liked was this notion of the mother-daughter vampire thing. Vampires traditionally, in the kind of history of vampire films, are predominantly males. They are the Bram Stoker Dracula character. They are the Nosferatu character in F.W. Murnau's film. They are always males who use women as victims. There is always a very strong sexual element between the kind of the sort of male seducer, right through to the Christopher Lee films and the Hammer movies. There's always the women are generally treated as either sex objects or victims. So what was interesting about the play was not only that the girls were similar ages, but also that they themselves were the dominant characters. They were feeding off people, and that was almost a kind of role reversal from the usual vampire films. There have been two other films that were like this. There was a film called Daughters of Darkness, an old Belgian film made in 1970, which had Delphine Seyrig, who was a classic French actress, who was a main protagonist with a female companion. And there's been one or two other pictures, but generally in literature and in film, the one has the male vampire as the main protagonist. So this was interesting. I like the idea of the two females, and I also love the idea that they were mother-daughter. That was something which, again, I'd not come across. The play itself didn't really have the same drama that the film script has, and really, when I approached Moira 3 or 4 years ago, she had a couple of film projects. One was Tomorrow Drew, which was either in the process of shooting. Yeah, it was actually not in the process of shooting, it was in pre-production. They were trying to put the finance together for Tomorrow Drew. She was also involved in the script for Jane Eyre. She had a play that she was writing for the National, plus a play that was going to New York as well. So I was kind of like trying to fit her project into the middle of all that. And she was a little resistant to begin with and couldn't see how it could be a film. And then I talked a little bit about what I liked about the play and what I thought could be filmic and cinematic. So she took some of those ideas on board, and we embarked on the development process. Obviously, having made, as I said earlier, Interview with the Vampire and Company of Wolves, I knew Neil also had a fascination for this kind of material. So I was just talking to Neil. He was in London. We were talking about other projects, and I told him I had this script, and would he be interested in reading it? And he did, and he loved it. We had very keen on Saoirse and Gemma, and Neil was very keen on them as well. They became kind of material to the whole process as well, that they came on very, very fast. And Neil worked with Moira on fashioning it for him. And that was a very good relationship and a very good process as well. It's, every film has a different life and a different sort of pre-life. Most people making films, who are kind of the majority of crew on a film, believe that the film begins and ends when you say, day one to the end of the film. But films have a huge life beforehand. I can't think of a movie other than The Crying Game where I've had to deal with so much of the process of making a film, where it just seems so many obstacles are thrown our way in terms of how do we get from the next day to the next day to the next day. And that's been both encouraging, because that's probably the most successful film I produced in terms of the size of budget to its US and world gross and the prestigious nature of it, with Oscar nominations and Oscar wins and things. And it's also rather scary that a project that you love so much is seen to be a difficult film. The challenge really for us in this film has been to overcome the sort of vampire tag. In that process of the 4 years of working with Moira on the script, they released Twilight. There's been successful TV shows, The True Blood. There's been countless vampire films, Let the Right One In, another example, which have set up for us a little bit of a problem. Our film is very different from those films, and is completely in another world. It has connotations of Twilight. There's definitely a young characters who have a kind of teenage love affair, which is kind of slightly like Twilight. It's also similar to Let the Right One In as much as it's kind of much more of a realistic setting. It's not in the court or in the castle of Count Dracula. It's in very much ordinary seaside towns and places, although it does have flashbacks from our grandiose historical past. So there are similarities with those films, there's similarities with True Blood and those kind of TV vampire shows, because they're real people, and it eschews the garlic cross Bram Stoker Dracula, referring as it does back to a sort of Byron, Sheridan Le Fanu era of vampires being immune to light and don't need to lie in coffins and all those sorts of things. So it has connections with those, and yet it's uniquely different. And I think the originality comes from Moira's writing and stems, I think, as well from the perspective of being about a much more female dilemma, about an adolescent girl's dilemma, about a woman who was born into a world which she has had to, she's been a slave to men in, a world that she's angry about. The anger that Clara feels against the world and against specifically men in the world is not something that Eleanor shares. Eleanor is a younger, more innocent character. So they're always pulling apart as people, although what connects them is mother and daughter. So the blood connects them. They need, as far as they're aware, they're the only people out there, or certainly as far as Eleanor is aware, they're the only people out there that are of their kind. So they need each other desperately. And the mother and daughter bond is strong, but their personalities and their instincts are completely different. And that's what makes that coupling so intriguing and so enjoyable. It's a great character study as much as anything else, and I think that's really what makes it into a movie as opposed to simply a gimmicky vampire concept. For both of them, it's a last hope to survive as something, not as humans, but as something. And it's really, at that point of death, what they're thinking and what they are, and that's what they will remain forever. What I think the film shows is that the drama around them forces them into change, and that's really what's, I hope, the satisfaction of the film, is that they are, by the end of the film, not the same characters they were at the beginning, that there has incredibly been a change. I think the fascination with vampires is that you get to live forever, and that's something we all would love to, a journey we'd all love to go on. Whether or not, if you think it's really a great thing to be living off of the blood of other people in order to enable that. There's something also very sexy about that you're seducing or being seduced by a vampire. That's also been something much more erotic than the old horror myths of Frankenstein or the werewolf or any of those things where you're not being killed, you're being seduced, and if you're lucky enough, the vampire will take you with him. What's kept the myth going is that there's something very cinematic about living forever and not being able to die, that you can do things and create things and be, in a way, immortal, and that makes for great moments in films where you're walking and into accidents and jumping off buildings, and you are standing up and walking away from it, and that's also something that we would all love to be able to think we could do. Immortality is a very seductive notion.
The main characters are Saoirse and Gemma's. They play sisters, or maybe mother and daughter. Gemma's character is working as a prostitute, and Saoirse's a schoolgirl. And it sort of turns out that they're both about 150 odd years old. And it's sort of a version of a vampire, but without the teeth. It's more like a mix between vampires and Highlander or something like that, I guess. And I play an old naval lieutenant, Darville, who turns Gemma into a vampire. But women aren't really allowed to be vampires. And she's been on the run for 150 years, while me and my brotherhood are coming looking for him. Well, he has more of a conscience, and he doesn't see there being, so much of a problem having a woman as part of the Brotherhood. But the Brotherhood are a bit like a golf club or something, they don't like women there and spoiling their fun. But he's a bit more progressive vampire. He falls ill in the 1700s or whatever it is, I think. and he's desperate to stay alive, so he starts investigating into, you know, old books and ancient parchments to try and work out a way of prolonging his life. He's heard rumors or whatever about, you know, this coven of men. So I mean, he's obviously willing to sacrifice other people in order to prolong his existence. The concept is still that one drinks to stay alive. But instead of fangs, you know, when you get, you know, hot for blood or whatever, your thumb turns into a sort of talon and you use your nail to slice the neck. Darville meets Clara on a beach when she's a very young girl. And he's fond of her or whatever at that age, or sees something, you know, innocent about her. And my friend, Riven, carries her off and has his wicked way with her. And makes her a whore, basically, sort of, which is what her, you know, her existence is. And then when I return as a vampire, Riven is with her. She's, you know, now I've been a prostitute for however many years, 10 years. And I like the idea that maybe a woman could be one of us, because they can prey on those that probably deserve to die rather than drinking from the innocent. Weirdly, it's quite often the very talented ones are often the nicest, probably because they've got less to prove or something like that. But no, they're good fun. They, you know, they take the piss out of you, which is always nice. And yeah, they're brilliant. I'd had an accident at home in Berlin and nearly cut my toe off. So I was like laid up for months. I couldn't work. I wasn't really getting any offers either. It's been a very quiet time. And someone who was, I think someone was meant to play my part before me. And he couldn't do it. So I went to meet Neil in London. And I think it's the first time and probably the only time in my life that you actually get offered the part in the meeting. I love the way he manages to, you know, he'll always look at the scene, and if it looks a bit eggy or whatever, you know, sometimes on the page it looks like it's right, and then when you're actually in the room, it all feels a bit stagnant or doesn't seem right, and he's always up for asking you what you think, you know, whether it feels real to you. But I really like the way he works. It's amazing, really. And he's such a, you know, he's a legend here, isn't he, and in cinema generally. And also Sean Bobbitt, who's doing the camera work, who did Hunger and Shame. You know, it's always nice. That makes you look good, you know, working with these sorts of people. And it's quite unusual to get scripts where, you know, the leads are two women, and the men in it sort of play a part in their lives rather than, you know, them being the love interest or something like that, you know. When you're working with someone that's done so much, you know you're in safe hands. You know that person knows what they're doing, and also, you know, it's exciting to then work with somebody whose films you've really enjoyed watching or something like that, you know, which is really a lucky thing as an actor. There's always in time certain styles or subjects that become very popular for a period of time. And I think this is, you know, we're not friendly vampires, which is quite a popular idea these days. But I don't know what it is. Maybe it's something to do with society now, or the insecurity that everyone's living in, the idea that these guys can live forever and invincible and don't suffer any of the problems that everyone else is facing at the moment or something.